The fluorescent lights of the Manhattan office building hummed overhead as Julia Martinez stared at her computer screen, the cursor blinking mockingly on the blank design template. It was 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the 30-year-old graphic designer was the last one left on the 23rd floor of the sleek Midtown high-rise. The city lights twinkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating a dazzling backdrop that most would find inspiring, but for Julia, they only emphasized her isolation. She could feel it building again, that familiar tightness in her chest, the anxious energy that crawled under her skin like an army of restless ants. Her fingers drummed against the desk as she fought the urge, but she already knew how this would end. The vending machine down the hall seemed to call her name, and the emergency stash of cookies in her bottom drawer practically screamed for attention. "Just one," she whispered to herself, the same lie she'd told 1,000 times before. But one cookie became 3, then the entire sleeve, followed by 2 bags of chips from the vending machine and a large chocolate bar she'd been saving for Friday. 20 minutes later, she sat surrounded by empty wrappers, her stomach painfully full, her heart heavy with shame. This wasn't hunger. It hadn't been hunger for a very long time. Food had become her therapist, her comfort blanket, her prison guard, all rolled into one. The worst part wasn't the physical discomfort or even the weight gain that had crept up over the past 5 years. It was the complete loss of control. The feeling that she was watching herself from outside her body, powerless to stop the compulsion that ruled her evenings. Julia's phone buzzed with a text from her mother in New Jersey. "Misha, don't forget Sunday dinner. Your cousins are coming from Boston." The thought of another family gathering, another event centered around food, made her stomach turn. She remembered when these dinners used to bring joy, when her grandmother's arroz con pollo was a celebration rather than a trigger. Now, every family meal felt like navigating a minefield, trying to appear normal while battling the urge to eat everything in sight, or worse, having to face the concerned looks when she barely touched her plate in an attempt to compensate for her private binges. The walk to her Upper West Side apartment was cold, the November air biting through her coat. She passed the bodega on the corner, fighting the urge to go in, then lost the battle and emerged with 2 pints of ice cream and a family-sized bag of tortilla chips. For the weekend, she told herself, knowing they wouldn't last the night. Her doorman, Roberto, greeted her warmly, but she kept her head down, convinced he could see her shame, could tell what was in the bags. In her apartment, she mechanically went through her nightly ritual. Eat until it hurt, promise tomorrow would be different, scroll through Instagram looking at fitness influencers and healthy meal prep posts until she felt sick with self-loathing, then fall asleep on the couch with the TV droning in the background. The next morning brought the familiar cycle of regret and determination. Julia stood in front of her bathroom mirror, avoiding her own gaze as she got ready for work. She chose her outfit carefully. Another flowing blouse that hid her midsection, paired with the black pants that had become her uniform. At the office, she declined her colleague Sarah's invitation to grab lunch, claiming she had too much work. The truth was, she'd already planned her lunch, a salad from the place downstairs, which she'd eat at her desk while everyone was out. It was easier this way, easier than explaining why she wasn't eating the office birthday cake or why she brought her own food to happy hour. But by 3 p.m., the restriction backfired spectacularly. The hunger, both physical and emotional, became overwhelming. She found herself in the office kitchen, eating leftover birthday cake straight from the box, praying no one would walk in. When Tom from accounting did appear, she quickly pretended to be cleaning up, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. "Long day?" he asked kindly, and she nodded, unable to trust her voice. That evening she called in sick to her Pilates class, the monthly membership another monument to her failed attempts at change. Instead, she stopped at 3 different stores on the way home, spreading out her purchases so no single cashier would see the full extent of her binge. As she sat on her kitchen floor later that night, surrounded by empty containers and discarded wrappers, Julia felt something break inside her. The tears came suddenly and forcefully, years of frustration and self-hatred pouring out in silent sobs. She thought about her younger self, the confident college student who had moved to New York with big dreams and bigger ambitions. That girl felt like a stranger now, buried under layers of shame and compulsion. She reached for her phone, scrolling through her contacts, desperately wanting to call someone, anyone, but who could she tell? How could she explain that despite having a good job, a nice apartment, and what looked like a successful life, she spent every evening locked in battle with herself, a battle she lost more often than she won? Tomorrow, she promised herself for the 1,000th time, tomorrow would be different. But even as she made the promise, she knew she didn't believe it anymore. The December cold had settled over New York City like a heavy blanket, and Julia found herself deviating from her usual route home. The subway delay at Times Square had forced her to walk, and she'd gotten turned around in the maze of streets near Hell's Kitchen. That's when she noticed it. A small corner market she'd never seen before, its windows glowing warmly against the grey evening. Odette's Fresh Market, read the hand-painted sign above the door. Something about the place felt different from the typical Manhattan bodega. Perhaps the boxes of fresh produce arranged outside despite the cold, or the way the warm light spilled onto the sidewalk like an invitation. Julia hesitated, her usual anxiety about food shopping warring with an inexplicable pull toward the little store. The bell above the door chimed gently as she entered, and immediately she was enveloped by the scent of fresh herbs and something baking. Behind the counter stood a woman who looked to be in her 70s, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her dark skin glowing with a warmth that seemed to come from within. "Welcome, dear," the woman said, her voice carrying a slight Caribbean accent. "I'm Odette. Haven't seen you before." There was something in her tone that wasn't pushy or sales-driven, just genuinely welcoming. Julia mumbled something about getting lost, her eyes scanning the store nervously, already calculating escape routes. But Odette just smiled and returned to arranging bunches of fresh cilantro, humming softly to herself. The store was unlike any market Julia had encountered in Manhattan. Instead of aisles of processed foods and fluorescent lighting, there were wooden crates, filled with vegetables she recognized from her grandmother's kitchen, herbs growing in pots along the window, and handwritten labels describing where each item came from. "That kale came in this morning from a farm upstate," Odette mentioned casually as Julia fingered the leaves. "Tastes like sunshine, even in winter." Julia found herself lingering, drawn to the authenticity of the place. She picked up a sweet potato, its weight solid and reassuring in her hand. "I don't really cook much," she admitted, surprising herself with the confession. Odette looked up from her work, her eyes kind, but knowing. "Cooking isn't just about the food, dear. It's about feeding yourself, really feeding yourself. There's a difference between eating and nourishing." Something about the way Odette said it, without judgment or preaching, made Julia's eyes prick with unexpected tears. She quickly looked away, pretending to examine a bunch of carrots. Odette continued working, giving Julia space, while somehow still making her feel seen. "You know," Odette said after a moment, "I make a soup every Thursday for the folks in the neighborhood. Nothing fancy, just good vegetables and love. You should come by tomorrow if you're free. 6 o'clock. It wasn't really a question, and Julia found herself nodding before she could think of an excuse. She left with just the sweet potato and a bunch of cilantro, but something else too, something she couldn't quite name. Thursday evening found Julia standing outside the market again, her anxiety at war with curiosity. Through the window, she could see a small group of people inside, mismatched chairs arranged in a circle, steam rising from bowls. She almost turned away, but Odette spotted her and waved her in with such genuine pleasure that Julia's feet moved of their own accord. The group was an eclectic mix. An elderly man who introduced himself as Murray from the apartment building next door, a young mother named Keisha with a baby on her hip, a college student named Alex who lived above the store, and a middle-aged construction worker named Diego. They welcomed Julia without fanfare, simply passing her a bowl of the most incredible-smelling soup she'd ever encountered. The soup was simple, just vegetables and beans in a clear broth, but the first spoonful brought tears to Julia's eyes. It tasted like her grandmother's kitchen, like Saturday mornings before everything became complicated, like food used to taste before it became her enemy. "Secret ingredient is time," Odette said, noticing Julia's reaction. "Slow cooking, letting things develop naturally, can't rush nourishment." But the conversation flowed around Julia as she ate, no one pushing her to talk, but including her with glances and smiles. Murray was telling a story about the neighborhood in the 60s. Keisha was laughing about her baby's first attempt at solid food, and Diego was asking Odette about her homeland of Trinidad. For the first time in years, Julia ate without counting, without shame, without the frantic energy that usually accompanied her meals. As weeks passed, Thursday soup night became the anchor in Julia's chaotic relationship with food. She learned that Odette had run the market for 15 years, that she'd lost her husband 5 years ago, that she believed food was medicine, but only when it was given and received with intention. "People forget," Odette said one evening, as she taught Julia how to properly chop onions, "that eating is supposed to be joyful. Somewhere along the way, we made it into a battle. But you can't win a war against your own body, dear. You can only make peace." Julia wanted to tell Odette about her struggles, about the binges and the shame, but the words stuck in her throat. Still, she had the feeling Odette knew anyway, the way she'd gently redirect Julia when she'd start to refuse seconds, saying, "Listen to your body, not your mind. Your body knows what it needs." The change was subtle at first. Julia found herself thinking about Thursday nights during her difficult moments. When the urge to binge hit, she'd sometimes find herself walking to Odette's instead, not even during soup night, just to be in the space. Odette would put her to work, having her sort beans or wash lettuce, her hands busy with simple tasks while her mind settled. They didn't always talk, but Odette would share stories about her childhood in Trinidad, about her mother's garden, about how her family had healed various ailments with different foods. "My mother always said," Odette mentioned one evening, "that the earth gives us what we need when we need it. Winter vegetables for warmth and grounding, summer fruits for cooling and joy. But we've forgotten how to listen to those rhythms." Julia realized she hadn't binged in 3 days, the longest stretch in months. The urge was still there, but it felt different, less like a command and more like a suggestion she could choose to decline. January arrived with a brutal cold snap that kept most New Yorkers huddled indoors, and Julia faced her biggest challenge yet. Her company's annual review season meant longer hours, higher stress, and the return of her most dangerous trigger, the combination of exhaustion and isolation. The first Monday of the month, she found herself alone in the office until midnight, and the familiar pattern emerged with frightening intensity. She ordered enough Chinese food for 3 people, telling herself she'd save some for tomorrow's lunch, but demolished everything while mindlessly working through spreadsheets. The shame was immediate and crushing, made worse by the fact that she'd been doing so well. She avoided Odette's for the rest of the week, unable to face the disappointment she imagined seeing in her friend's eyes. But Thursday arrived, and with it, a text from Odette. "Soup's on. Your chair's waiting." The simple message broke something open in Julia. She arrived at the market with red eyes and a heavy heart, ready to confess her failure. But before she could speak, Odette pulled her into the kitchen area behind the main store. "Help me with these potatoes," she said matter-of-factly. As they peeled and chopped in silence, Odette finally spoke. "You know, dear, healing isn't a straight line. It's more like—" She paused, thinking, "like learning to dance. You step on toes, you stumble, but each time you get back up, your body remembers a little more of the rhythm." Julia's tears fell onto the cutting board, and Odette gently took the knife from her shaking hands. "Tell me," she said simply, and finally, Julia did. The words poured out, The years of struggle, the failed diets, the therapy that hadn't stuck, the conviction that she was fundamentally broken. She told Odette about eating until she couldn't breathe, about the elaborate lies she told to hide her behavior, about the profound loneliness that food temporarily numbed. Odette listened without interrupting, occasionally squeezing Julia's hand. When Julia finally ran out of words, Odette was quiet for a moment. "You're not broken, dear," she said finally. "You're human, and you're trying to solve an emotional problem with a physical solution. Food can't fix loneliness any more than loneliness can be satisfied by eating." She stood and pulled Julia into a firm hug. "But you're not alone anymore. You have us, you have this place, and most importantly, you're starting to have yourself back." That night's soup group felt different. When Julia looked around the circle, she realized these people had become her chosen family. Murray, who she'd learned was a Holocaust survivor, always saved the chair next to him for her. Keisha had started bringing her baby food for Julia to try, joking that if a 6-month-old could eat mindfully, anyone could. Diego had shared his own story of recovery from alcohol addiction, the daily choice to stay present with discomfort rather than numbing it. Alex, the college student, was navigating their own journey with anxiety and found the Thursday gatherings a safe harbor in the storm of academic pressure. "We're all healing from something," Keisha said that night, as if reading Julia's mind. "Might as well do it together." February brought a shift in Julia's approach. Instead of another diet or restriction plan, she began what Odette called learning to listen. Each morning she'd sit with a cup of tea that Odette had blended for her, a mix of herbs from the market, and try to tune into what her body actually wanted, not what her mind screamed for in moments of stress, but what would truly nourish her. Some days she failed spectacularly, finding herself elbow-deep in a pizza box at 2 a.m. But other days she found herself craving the simple foods from Odette's kitchen: roasted vegetables with olive oil and sea salt, hearty beans with fresh herbs, fruit that actually tasted like fruit rather than an idea of health. The breakthrough came during a particularly stressful week when her biggest client threatened to pull their account. Old Julia would have spent every evening in a food-fueled haze, but instead she found herself at Odette's market each night after work. Not talking, just helping with inventory or cleaning, her hands busy while her mind processed the stress. On Thursday, she made the soup herself for the first time, following Odette's gentle guidance. As she served her friends, Murray raised his bowl in a toast to Julia's soup and to Julia's courage. The tears came again, but they were different this time, cleaner somehow. That night, she ate 2 bowls of her own soup, not because she was out of control, but because she was hungry, and it was good, and her body wanted the warmth and nourishment it provided. March arrived with the first hints of spring, and Julia noticed her clothes fitting differently, though she'd stopped weighing herself weeks ago at Odette's suggestion. "Your body will find its natural weight when you stop fighting it," Odette had said. More importantly, Julia's relationship with food was transforming. She'd started cooking simple meals at home, sending Odette pictures of her attempts. Some were disasters that they'd laugh about later, but others surprised her with their success. She'd even invited Sarah from work to lunch, choosing a place where she could order what she actually wanted, rather than what she thought she should have. The binges hadn't stopped entirely, but they came less frequently and with less violence. When they did happen, she could talk about them at Thursday soup night without drowning in shame. Spring fully bloomed across New York City as April arrived, and with it came an unexpected opportunity. Odette had been quieter than usual during recent Thursday gatherings, and Julia noticed her moving more slowly, occasionally wincing when she thought no one was looking. Finally, Murray confronted what everyone had been thinking. "Odette, what's going on? And don't say nothing." With a sigh, Odette admitted she'd been diagnosed with arthritis that was making it increasingly difficult to manage the market alone. Her daughter in New Jersey had been pressuring her to sell and move in with her family. The group sat in stunned silence, unable to imagine Thursday nights without Odette, without this sacred space that had become home for so many of them. That night, Julia couldn't sleep. The thought of losing Odette's market, of losing this place that had saved her in so many ways, was unbearable. By morning, she had an idea that seemed simultaneously crazy and perfectly right. She arrived at the market early, finding Odette arranging the morning deliveries with obvious difficulty. "Teach me," Julia said without preamble. "Teach me how to run this place. Let me help you keep it going." Odette's eyes widened, then filled with tears. "Dear, that's a huge commitment. What about your design work?" Julia had been thinking about this too. "I can do both. I can work here in the mornings and evenings, keep my design clients but scale back. Odette, this place saved my life. Let me help save it." What followed was a month of intensive learning. Julia arrived at 5 a.m. each day to help with deliveries, learning to select the best produce, understanding the rhythms of the market. She met the farmers who supplied their vegetables, the bread baker who delivered fresh loaves 3 times a week, the herbalist who provided Odette's special teas. Each person had a story, a connection to real food that went beyond commerce. She learned that Odette often reduced prices for elderly customers on fixed incomes, that she kept a running tab for the single mother down the street who always paid when she could. This wasn't just a business. It was a community lifeline. The physical work was exhausting, but grounding in a way Julia hadn't expected. Her body, which she'd battled for so long, became her ally. She developed strength from lifting boxes, stamina from the constant movement, a new appreciation for what her body could do rather than how it looked. The morning prep became a meditation, the repetitive tasks of washing, sorting and arranging produce, calming her mind in ways years of therapy hadn't achieved. She still had difficult days, moments when stress triggered the old urges, but now she had tools. She could knead bread dough instead of eating it, could channel her anxiety into creating beautiful displays of vegetables, could text her Thursday night family for support. May brought a new challenge and opportunity. A popular food blog had discovered Odette's market and wanted to do a feature on the Thursday night soup tradition. Julia's first instinct was panic. Exposure meant vulnerability, meant potentially sharing her story with strangers. But Odette, with her infinite wisdom, reframed it. Your story could help someone else who's struggling. Shame grows in darkness, dear. Sometimes we need to let the light in. The blogger, a young woman named Priya, joined them for soup night. As the evening unfolded, Julia found herself sharing her journey, not the sanitized version she might have told before, but the real, messy, ongoing truth of it. The article, published in early June, was titled "The Healing Table: How a Corner Market in Hell's Kitchen Became a Sanctuary." It told Julia's story alongside those of the other Thursday night regulars, painting a picture of community healing that resonated with thousands of readers. The market was flooded with new customers, but more importantly, with people seeking their own healing. Odette and Julia decided to add a second soup night to accommodate everyone, and Julia took the lead on Thursday, while Odette handled Tuesdays. Standing in front of the group that first Thursday in June, ladle in hand, Julia felt the profound shift in her journey. She wasn't just receiving healing anymore, she was helping create it for others. The surprise came when her design clients started noticing changes in her work. The campaign she created had a new authenticity, a groundedness that resonated with audiences. One client, a sustainable food company, was so impressed they offered her a contract to rebrand their entire visual identity. "Your work has soul now," they told her. Julia realized that healing her relationship with food had healed other parts of her life too. She was designing from a place of abundance rather than scarcity, creating from joy rather than compulsion. Her work-life balance, previously non-existent, now had rhythm. Mornings at the market, afternoons with design, evenings that might include soup night, cooking at home, or simply being present with friends. As summer solstice approached, Julia stood in the market early one morning, arranging the day's produce. The scale in her bathroom had been relegated to the closet months ago, but she knew her body had found its equilibrium. More importantly, food had become what it was always meant to be: nourishment, pleasure, community, but not therapy or enemy. She still had moments of struggle, would probably always have them, but they no longer defined her. Odette appeared beside her, moving more easily thanks to treatment and Julia's help with the heavy work. "You know," Odette said, surveying the beautiful arrangement of summer vegetables, "you've become quite the nourisher yourself." Julia smiled, thinking of the journey from that first December evening to now. The woman who had once eaten alone in shame now fed others with love. The designer who had created from emptiness now drew from a well of authentic experience. The person who had been at war with her body had finally, beautifully made peace. As the morning sun flooded through the windows, warming the small market with golden light, Julia began preparing vegetables for that evening's soup. Each chop and slice a small act of revolution, a choice for healing, a step toward the life she'd always deserved but had finally learned to create.